So now we look at the ways public policy can affect increases in productivity and living standards. So one is savings and investment. We, if we want to produce more capital, because one of the things that we need to increase productivity is more capital, then we need to invest in create factories or machineries to produce more. Since resources are scarce, we have to then, save up money to produce capital, which means that we don't have that much money for consumption. So, for example, if I get $1,000 uh, per month, let's say, as my paycheck, and if I want to save more, so if I want to save $300, that means I can't consume $300 this month. I'm saving it for the future. Similarly, so again, if I increase my savings to $500, then my consumption this month will decrease even more. So similarly, if a country tends to save more, collectively, they tend to consume less at present and save money for creating capital in the future so that they can consume more in the future. So if you reduce consumption, it increases savings. This extra saving funds can go into providing loans to business owners who then go and invest money to create more factories or buy more machineries. So there is a trade-off between current and future consumption. However, if you want to study in the next chapter, we're not going to cover it, but government can implement policies that raises savings and investment. So governments encourage savings. So in the U.S., they do it by 401ks. They're like, all right, if you save part of your salary, then we won't tax it right now, but we'll tax it later. It's a different mechanism that encourages people to save more. That way, capital can rise, causing productivity and living standards to rise too. However, this growth is temporary because of something called diminishing returns to capital. If you don't have much capital and you give somebody some capital, the productivity will go up a lot. But then if you keep on giving that person more and more capital, the increases in productivity will get smaller and smaller. And this is called diminishing returns to capital. If we draw a graph where the y-axis is output per worker or productivity and x-axis is capital per worker, it will look something like this. Initially, if workers have very little capital and you give them a lot of some capital, let's say 1 unit increase of capital, their productivity is going to go up quite a bit. So if a worker does not have a computer and you give that worker a computer, then his productivity will go up a lot. But now if that worker, let's say, has 2 computers, and if you give that worker another computer, then the third computer really does not have as much of an effect in increasing productivity as the other two. So it increases productivity just slightly. Here we come up with the idea of catch-up effect. Catch-up effect is the property where poor countries tend to grow more rapidly than richer countries. So if a poor country doesn't have much capital and starts there, and a rich country has a lot of capital and starts there, if we give them both the same amount of capital, then a poor country will grow at a faster rate, or the productivity will grow at a faster rate than a rich country. So what example do we have? Over the period of 1960 to 1990, the US and South Korea devoted a similar share of GDP to investment. However, the US was a much, much wealthier country than South Korea. It still is, but growth rate in South Korea was over 6% during that time period, whereas it was only 2% in the US. And this is explained by the catch-up effect. In 1960, capital over labor was far smaller in Korea than in the US. So if you gave Koreans more capital, they were able to increase their productivity at a much higher rate. Now, sometimes countries may not have enough money to invest within their own countries. So to raise capital, what you could do is ask foreigners to come in and invest in your country. So you could do it through foreign direct investment, which is an investment by a foreign country or a foreign company to like invest and manage a firm in another country. So when Mercedes-Benz builds a factory, I think it's in South Carolina, or BMW has a factory in South Carolina, BMW's management in Germany controls the production activities of their factory in South Carolina. That is called foreign direct investment. The other kind is foreign portfolio investment, is where the foreign entity, a company or a government, invests in a local company but does not interfere with the day-to-day activities. So if a lot of times, let's say, for example, if a British individual or a British businessman buys shares in Bank of America, the British individual is let, and so the British individual now invested in foreign portfolio investment. The British individual lets Bank of America do all their business activities, doesn't really care about how Bank of America is run, as long as they get some return out of it. So some of the returns from these investments flow back to the foreign countries that supplied the funds. So the profits that BMW makes in America goes back to Germany, or the profit that McDonald's makes in France comes back to the US. The other kind is education. So we know that human capital affects productivity, and so increases in human capital increases growth and productivity levels. So government can increase productivity by promoting education. In the US, it is done by public schools. So up to the 12th grade, education is free for the students who are in public schools. And education has significant effects. In the US, each year of schooling raises a worker's wage by 10%. It has been calculated that a college graduate over the course of their lifetime earns almost $1 million more than a high school graduate. So education pays, but investing in human capital has a trade-off. Because if you spend a year in school, that means that you're not working full time. And so you're giving up wages for a full year in order to stay in school. So you're going to school so that you have a higher wage later, but you're giving up. So there is an opportunity cost to go to school, and we talked about the opportunity cost in chapter 1. So in this case, there is a very high trade-off for some students. Health and nutrition are also important. Healthcare expenditure is a type of investment in human capital. If the workers are healthier, they're more productive. In countries that have a lot of malnourishment, if you want to increase productivity, you feed the workers more. Raising workers' calorie intake raises their productivity. So it was seen in South Korea and in Britain. Robert Fogel, who was a Nobel Prize winner, in his analysis found out that almost a third of British growth rate between 1790 to 1980, so almost 200 years of growth, can be attributed to improved nutrition of the British population. Property rights are also important, although it's not directly in that formula, but it does help in creation of capital or getting human capital. Because if, in short, property rights is basically putting ownership on things that I own. So if I own my car, that's my car. No one else can come and take that car away from me. So in this case, there has to be respect for property rights. In many countries, there isn't a respect for property rights. So in those countries, the justice system doesn't work well. Contracts are not always enforced. There is corruption that goes unpunished. Sometimes firms have to bribe government officials for getting permits and stuff. So all these and political instability creates uncertainty. So if I have uncertainty, why should I invest in a country then? So let's say, for example, the case of Venezuela. In Venezuela, there's a lot of uncertainty about ownership of property. If you have a business, the government may take it away from you. So in that case, if I'm a businessman, if I have money, I don't want to invest in that country because it's unsafe. Government might take away my property. So what I do is that I take my money and leave the country. And so a lot of people from Venezuela, a lot of rich people move to Miami because they consider Venezuela to be not so safe, but Miami safer because there is property rights in the US. Free trade helps in increasing income. A lot of countries got richer because of their free trade policies. Inward-oriented policies are those policies that aim to raise living standards by stopping trade with the rest of the world or limiting trade with the rest of the world. On the other hand, outward policies are those that actively promote trade with the rest of the world. We learned in chapter 3, and we saw it in a model, how trade can make everyone better off. Trade has a similar effect as discovering new technology. It improves productivity and living standards. For example, the US created smartphones. So Apple, a US-based company, created smartphones, and now that smartphone, of course, increased technology level in the US. Now, using that smartphone, that if the policies were all inward, so we did not trade, then these smartphones would not have gone to Africa or Asia. Now, because of trade, these smartphones are in Africa and Asia, and people are using them in different innovative ways, doing mobile banking and many other things, and that's helping to improve productivity and living standards in those countries. So because of trade, it's now making other places, even though US discovered that, or US based company invented the smartphone, it does have huge effects on different parts of the world. If countries were all inward oriented, then we would not have seen such proliferation of smartphones. So some countries tried that. As I said, Argentina was a very wealthy country in the early 20th century, and then they actually were promoting inward-oriented policies, and it did not work, and Argentina progressively got poorer. Countries with outward-oriented policies often succeeded, like South Korea, Singapore, and Taiwan after 1960. Research and development is also very important because research and development helps to create new technology. And technological progress is the main reason why living standards have increased so much over time. And one reason is knowledge is a public good. Ideas can be shared. So computers were invented, and that ideas was not just used by Bill Gates to enrich himself. He actually let other people use it so that other peoples could innovate and create newer versions of softwares or different kinds of softwares. So policies promote technological progress. Well, patent laws. Patent law is a protection. If I invent something, I get protection for 10 or 15 years so that um, I can be the sole producer of that product. Tax incentives to provide support for private sector research and development, or grants in universities. So the US government gives a lot of grants to universities where research is done, and so that research helps to create new ideas. So for example, the touch screen technology that we use almost every hour, I will say, on our cell phones, that was invented in early 1970s at the University of Kentucky. Now at that time, it was a cool idea. You have touch screen technology. It really didn't have any use. So, but that thing was invented using grants to do basic research. Now, based on that, years later, that touchscreen technology became one of the most important things that helped to create smartphones. Population growth is important. It may affect living standards in three ways. One is it stretches natural resources. So 200 years ago, Reverend Malthus from Britain argued that if population keeps on growing without improvements of um, any other products, let's say agriculture, it would strain society's ability to provide for itself. However, since then the world population has increased so many times, almost sixfold. If Malthus was right, then living standards would have fallen. But however, we've seen that the world is getting richer and richer over time. What Malthus did not do is Malthus failed to account for technological progress and productivity growth. Because of technological progress, we are now able to feed 7 billion people in this world right now. Population growth does dilute capital stock because more population means higher L. So the denominator of K over L gets larger, so K over L gets smaller. So that also happens to H as well as K. If you have more population growth, it means more education expenditure for children and health expenditure for children. So it puts a greater strain on the education system. Countries that have faster population growth tend to have lower education attainment because the government can't provide adequate education to all the children. However, it also can promote technological progress because if you have more people, you have more scientists, inventors, engineers, more discoveries, faster progress, and economic growth. Michael Kramer, who's a very famous development economist, found out that over the course of human history, growth rates increased as world population increased. So whenever world population went up, people tend to get wealthier. So it's not really population growth can be a good thing or a bad thing. It's basically how we use that resource. And Michael Kramer also found out that more populated regions grew faster than less populated regions. So that's all we have for this chapter.